Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Design a Quality System That Works, Ask the Expert session. Today, we have some great panelists with us. If you've been with us before, you know Regina Fullen. And we have also today, Tim Fisher, who's a quality consulting expert. I'll be introducing them in just a moment. In the meantime, as everyone's getting into the room, I just want to go over some housekeeping items. First off, we want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to join us today. If this is your first session with us, welcome. Just curious if there's any teams here. We love to give teams a shout out. If your team's on the session today, you can go ahead and let us know in the chat module that you should see on the right. Go ahead and type in your team name or the company you're with. We will be handling questions at the end of the session. However, when everyone registered, you submitted a question, as this is an Ask the Expert session. And so we have done our best to compile all those questions that you have given us and have created this customized presentation tailored to the questions you wanted answered. If for some reason your question you don't see it answered, we'll try to make some time at the end of the session. And we'll also be doing some follow-up with people who may have had a really specific question addressed. So if you don't see an answer in today's session, we'll do our best to get with you after today and get that answered. We will be sending out a copy of this recording along with the presentation. That'll be coming at you sometime on Monday. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be contact information for us if you have anything you'd like to follow up on. If at any time you have a technical issue or anything, feel free to hit us up in the questions box in the console. All right, it looks like we've got several attendees in the session, so we're gonna go ahead with introductions and introduce today's speakers. If you've been with us before, you know Regina. She is the VP of RAQA Consulting here at Compliance Team. She assists our clients in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries to help them achieve ever-increasing compliance to regulations in the pharma, medical device, and related industries. Within her role here at Compliance Team, Regina uses her writing skills to publish many articles you may see through our email marketing and social media to help medical manufacturers stay current with regulatory changes, industry trends, and help improve product quality. Regina has many acronyms, including a certified quality engineer, certified quality auditor, certified manager of quality organizational excellence, and she holds a regulatory affairs certification for medical devices with RAPS. All right, and today we are super excited to have the privilege to also have with us Tim Fisher, quality consulting expert of Great Solutions Group on behalf of Compliance Quest. Tim has been in the life science compliance arena for 30 years. He began his career in Abbott Labs in Chicago in lab operations, manufacturing, and technical support. From there, he was able to build on that experience, and he spent several years as director of compliance for 3 different CMOs. He began working directly with compliance software platforms, including Compliance Quest, Pilgrim, ETQ, and Prism ID, as an industry SME, and now manages a consulting group focused on Quality 4.0 software initiatives, GMP quality systems auditing, and FDA supplier remediation. So we are so glad to have Tim with us today and be partnering with Compliance Quest on this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to Regina.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, and welcome Tim to this wonderful webinar. He will have some fantastic input to share. So first, we're going to start off with just discussing our course objectives here. We want to understand what this quality system requirement for medical devices is all about. Well, also a lot of what we have to say will be about pharmaceuticals as well. The pharmaceutical quality system is an ICH requirement, but it's specifically called out in the FDA reg. So the focus of this will be medical devices. And then we want to identify ways that you can gain business value through implementation of a quality management system, because it's a requirement. You may as well leverage it to get some business benefit out of it. And so we're going to use risk management, though, as a way of being able to reduce the burden of a quality management system. So you're focusing on what's important. And so we're going to talk about all these different things, and hopefully you'll get some valuable knowledge out of this presentation. So let's just dig in. We got a lot of ground to cover here, but we'll get there. So the first thing we want to talk about is, how is a quality management system structured? And the way it is structured is, management is at the core of a quality management system. And then you see, surrounding the quality management, there are 6 essential subsystems, quality subsystems, that management needs to keep their eye on. Facilities and equipment controls, corrective and preventive action, design control, production and process control, records or documents and change control, and materials controls. The FDA, when they come in and do an inspection, they are looking at whether management is actually involved in reviewing these things, so doing a management review. They're not going to look at the content of what actually gets reviewed. That's trade secret to the company. But management has to be reviewing it, because management has a vested interest in the success of the quality management system. Now, we had some questions that kind of came in. One of them was, well, if management's at the hub of the quality management system, how many people are needed to run a quality management system? And the answer is 2. You need one person who's the doer and the other person who's the checker. And they can switch roles. They can both be co-managers, where one person manages some elements of the system and the other person manages the other elements. But there needs to be management at the hub. The other thing that you need to be considering is that there should be a quality manual that kind of outlines how all these systems are interconnected and how management is managing those things. And part of that is using risk management. We'll get into that a little bit better. And the other thing that's involved here is that management may be at a hub, but management is not directly involved, right? Managers manage, they delegate. That's what happens in an organization, and that's okay. But what's not okay is that somebody's not managing it. So management can delegate, and often that delegation in a quality management system is to quality. Quality is going to make sure that these things are actually done, and they're actually done right. And then they report to management. So quality is involved in making sure that management is aware of what is going on in their organization. And if anything is amiss, then it's management that takes action. And quality is doing a lot of that stuff at the behest of management. So the decisions are often delegated off to quality.
Hey, Regina, I might, if it'd be okay, just have a thought on that as well.
Sure.
Hey, everybody, I'm Tim. Very glad to be a part of the webinar today on behalf of Compliance Quest. So yeah, I've, as you guys know, we've talked a little bit about this, but I've spent several years in the audit business. And so as I go out there and perform audits, and I think some of the questions that came in really relate to culture. And, you know, I audit companies where management's on board and they understand how important a QMS is. And those are great companies because there's an investment of time and resources and commitment to that quality management system. So for those of you who might be struggling a little bit in a culture where your management doesn't necessarily understand how important that QMS is, the best advice we can give to you is just education. You know, obviously a business exists to make a profit. We all understand that, but with FDA controls and some of the ICH, as well as like the Q10 pharmaceutical quality system that came out, completely agree with Regina where that focus is on management. In the old days, it used to be, you know, upper management could say we didn't know. And quite frankly, that's no longer an excuse. So if you struggle and have some culture issues related to the value of your QMS compared to your executive management team, again, education is the key there, just to help them understand that. So thanks, Regina.
Oh, thank you, Tim. That was an excellent point to make. And so for management to be in control of the management has to conduct a management review. And so there are some general things that are covered in a management review. There may be some differences between what you see in 820 and what you see in ISO 13485, and we'll get into those, get into that a little bit differently. But all management reviews have a generalized structure, and what you can do is you basically use the regulation as a checklist of things to cover. But in general, you're going to be reviewing your quality plan, saying, well, what did we say we were going to accomplish? Are we accomplishing this? Yes or no? You're going to be looking at your trending metrics. Those are your key performance indicators that are related to quality. They can be complaint rates. They can be failure rates. They can be non-conformances. They can be your CAPAs. Whatever it is that's agreed upon, and of course covered in the regulation that you're marrying up to, those are the things that you cover. They may be things that are important to management, like rework rates, where that costs the company money. And it's also a quality issue. That may be an important thing to talk about as well. Then you're going to talk about resourcing needs. Do you have the resources in place to accomplish the goals that you have with regard to bringing down the complaint rate, achieving the goals in your quality plan? And this is where management is very important, because they're the ones that are providing the money to make this happen. Either it's personnel, or it's equipment, or it's computerized systems. Those resourcing needs need to be addressed as well. And then the next thing you need to do is to look and say, okay, what are our goals and what are we going to need to achieve in time for the next management review? So that's the basic structure of a management review. You don't necessarily have to use a control chart when you're doing trending. You want to see, are things going in the right direction? And if there is something that's out of control, that appears to be out of control, do you have an assignable cause for it? So you don't necessarily have to follow specifically Westgard rules for your trending. It's a trend chart, not necessarily a control chart. Control charts may be useful for certain processes, especially if they're things that are automated, but it doesn't need to do that. You have to look at where your noise is, and is there an impact? Statistical impact is not necessarily the same as practical impact. So keep that in mind as well. It's about judgment and consensus to measure the effectiveness of your quality management system. Tim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I totally agree in terms of the KPI and metrics, and it's I think that's part of the key with management review is typically upper level management folks look at numbers, right? So what you're trying to do here is establish, do we have any trends? You know, are we heading in the right direction in terms of maybe complaints or deviations or CAPAs, you know, any type of quality event? And what are we doing, of course, from the ISO 9000 and one standpoint, what are we doing for continuous improvement to continue to get better and better at what we do? No company's perfect. You know, we all have failures, and we understand that within a company. But you know, what the FDA really wants to see is you're focused on those areas that I like to call them your problem children. You know, particular areas that your company's struggling with, and those are the things that really should be focused on in terms of management review. So agreed with you. Thanks, Regina.
Yeah, I want to add something here, and that is your management review. The actual things that you discussed are not discoverable during an FDA inspection. So you can feel free to air your dirty laundry during a management review. And that's why the FDA has determined that that's not discoverable. But they want to see that you've done it. So you better have a good log that identifies that you had the management review and who attended. So that's something important to know, that this is an area where you can spill your guts, well, within reason, to discuss this stuff.
Yep, agreed.
So there are 6 basic quality subsystems per CFR 820. We already kind of talked about them. And here's what they do. So we have CAPA, and you're going to be fixing systemic nonconformities and potential nonconformities. That's the preventive part. At the root causes, going to be design control, and that's to make sure that your medical devices that are in development are designed consistent to their intended uses. Their class 1 medical devices, which are very, very basic devices, are exempted from this rule, but it's still a good idea to have this. Then there's production and process controls. That is making sure that you're manufacturing your product consistently every single time that you're going to end up getting a conforming product. Records, documents, and change controls. So we want to make sure SOPs, your documents are sufficiently reviewed before they're used. And then material controls, same thing for your materials, making sure that you have purchasing procedures in place and such. And then facility and equipment controls, which is often called change controls, for your manufacturing processes, your manufacturing equipment, and all those things that are in place, including validation.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Regina. So, when you look at these 6, we'll call them 6 systems, and these line up perfectly with what the FDA calls their QSIT program and what they audit to. But you've all, for those of you who might be somewhat newer to the industry, there's a saying out there that if it's not documented, it didn't occur, right? So behind all of this structure is really the documentation, not just the procedures on how to perform these activities, but the records that, from an audit perspective, the objective evidence of the records that those activities have been properly completed. And so, kind of relating it back to a QMS, these are the framework and structure that you have to have in place. But where QMS comes in is the management and the control, the documents, the records, the personnel, and the ability to execute on all of these processes consistently. That's really what the FDA is looking for. Is it documented, and are these processes under control, and are they consistent? Okay, Regina.
Yeah, so yes, you're right. So there should be a record for every single decision that you made that relates to any of these 6 quality systems, subsystems. So you're correct. So there are 2 QMS standards for devices. So one is mandatory, that's the FDA quality system regulation, and the other one is mandatory in some jurisdictions, ISO 13485. So for instance, in the United States, if you are marketing a medical device, you must follow 21 CFR 820. If you are marketing product to a foreign jurisdiction, they will ascribe to the standard in ISO 13485 for that product. For instance, if you're selling product to Canada, they are going to make sure that you are following ISO 13485 through the medical device single audit program. So there are differences between these, but they're very, very, very close. And we're going to get into some of that detail there. Let me see. So we did get a question about, well, when should I have this implemented? And of course, you would have to implement these systems before you market product, especially for the FDA. Before you sell your medical device product, you need to have the quality management system implemented so that you are manufacturing according to that quality. And let me see any other questions that we had here. Oh, we have also questions about, the European medical device regulation or the in vitro medical device regulation in Europe, and they follow ISO 13485 as well. So you want to be able to conform to ISO and FDA if you are selling product both in the US and in foreign jurisdictions. Any other questions?
Regina, I was going to make a quick statement about that, but yeah, for those of you, that are pharma or maybe bio, of course, we've got medical device folks on as well, but 820 is a really, really well-written part of the Code of Federal Regulations. And as an example, like management review and CAPA, right? They're not really identified in the 211, 21 CFR 211. They're much better identified in 820. So even if you are, outside of the medical device arena, a lot of these regulations are really good. They're well written and very applicable to what you do. So I don't want you to think that we're forgetting those of you who are, outside the med device world. So
thank you. So we're going to kind of compare and contrast the standards. I'm going to start off with Tim talking about these differences, but you can see they cover the same topics in both standards.
Absolutely. So, as I get out, and again, I've got been doing a lot of audits, and so you run across a lot of interesting and unique situations and definitely interpretations of the regulations. The best thing you can do if you're kind of a newer company or a startup or maybe a virtual company with just limited resources, both of these requirements, you've got the FDA requirement on the 820s, but the ISO 9000 standards are extremely well written. They're very clear. And as you can see, they really line up nicely related to these various control areas. So, quality system versus quality management system, right? It's documented in that case, ICHQ 10, which is pharmaceutical quality systems, really spells out nicely what kind of systems you should have in place. Your management responsibilities, we've already kind of spoken to that, but no longer can management, again, say we didn't know. It's really management's responsibility to take on the effectiveness and the detail and support and resourcing behind a good solid QMS program. Your internal audit program, right? This is in Europe, this is kind of, or even in the ISO standard, is kind of known as self-inspection. That's the opportunity that you have to do internally. And again, what Regina was saying about management review, that also applies generally to internal audits, that those are not, you don't necessarily have to come forth with those with, say, an FDA inspection. Those are for your purposes, but it's your chance to really identify where you've got gaps internally before the agency comes in and finds those gaps. Your personnel, right? Qualifications, training, and experience. Those are the three keys. So both the ISO as well as 820 spell that out nicely. Of course, 21 CFR 211 has those requirements as well. Your design controls, right? We're not necessarily going to get that deep in the weeds today in terms of a good design control program, but those are really important, and those are also identified in both the standard as well as the requirement or the regulation. Document control. Here we get back to how important it is to not only have procedures, but again, to have the objective records to show and to prove that whatever that procedure said in terms of the process steps were completed. So a good QMS, we'll talk a little bit more about this. You can do this all on paper. Absolutely. You do not necessarily need an electronic system, but there comes a jump point, and again, we'll talk about this in a few slides, where it might begin to make sense that you do take a look at an electronic QMS because it becomes a lot to manage, especially with a smaller team. And then your purchasing controls, right? That's your supply chain stuff. So there's a huge focus, and there's been a big focus on supplier management for a number of years now. Not only the qualification of suppliers, but the ongoing, how do we maintain our suppliers? What kind of metrics and KPIs? What kind of scorecarding do we do with that? And again, there's electronic QMS systems out there that do that super well. But you can see it's a requirement to really capture that whole supply chain effort behind what you're doing. Okay, Regina.
Yeah, so a few questions that came up, and one person said, well, how would I go about like numbering my procedures, or do I even have to number my procedures? Well, there's no requirement to number your procedures. But the best practice I've seen that really works nicely is that if you're going to be creating a brand new procedure numbering system, the ones I've seen that work really well are ones that align to the ISO standard numbering. And then that kind of helps you during an ISO inspection or even, FDA inspection, because if it, for instance, has to do with management responsibility, the document number starts with a 5. If it has to do with documentation practices, it'll be 4.2. And it really helps out that way, because then you have some alignment. The other question that we had associated with this was, or actually just a comment I wanted to make, and that is training. You have to also have quality systems training. People need to be aware that they are working under the umbrella of the quality management system, so they're not off doing their own thing and doing what makes sense to them necessarily. The common sense is common sense, but you also have to follow the procedures. So that's that. Now we're going to go to the next set of FDA requirements compared to ISO standards. And we have, identification and traceability. And we can see that there are a few sections associated with identification and traceability in 21 CFR 820 subpart F, which is 0.60, 0.86, and 0.65. An ISO standard talks about the same thing. And there's specific requirements for traceability for implantable medical devices, because of course, if there's a problem with that, you want to know its source and whether it could have harmed someone. And then you have the production and process controls and process validation. And you can see that there's a lot of requirements required for validation. And of course, we have validation requirements in the pharma side as well, which get very specific. And we're trying very hard in the medical device arena to marry up to those same pharmaceutical requirements, because they are good. Again, these two standards talk to each other. Then we talk about inspection, measuring, and test equipment. That's basically your calibration program. And then receiving in process finished device acceptance, having to do with verifying your purchased product, having some kind of a supplier quality program, monitoring and measuring of processes, and monitoring and measuring of product. And then we also have this, that we're not talking about so much UDI here, but there are specific unique device identification requirements for devices that are not quite the same as for pharmaceutical, where there's a track and trace system. Tim, any comments here?
Yeah, no, it's good. All of these, from the receiving, raw materials through your processing, the validation effort, it's all pretty well spelled out. So what, for you folks that might be, again, fairly new to this world and kind of starting to get introduced to it, the best thing I can recommend is go ahead and read the regs. There's a lot of good information out there, and really start building your understanding of what each of these systems entails. And as always, there's great people like Regina and other folks out there willing to step in with the experience and help you build out these systems. But these are all systems that the FDA would look at and would expect to see. So it's really, really important that you do a good job at building the framework for these. Yep. So, Okay. Want me to handle this slide, Regina?
Yeah, go ahead, handle this slide too.
Perfect. So, non-conforming product, this is a huge piece of what we do in the life science world, right? The ideal world, your supply chain is perfect, your raw materials are perfect, your packaging, your labeling, your software development, all those things, but that's not the reality. So there's not an issue with non-conforming product, right? That's not a showstopper from an FDA perspective. It's what you do with it. So this becomes super important, in terms of identifying it, tracking it, segregating it, quarantining it, and as you can see with the ISO standard, even potentially doing a rework on it. But again, all of that has to be documented. Why did we make the decisions we made? Where did we find this product? What did we do about it? And then that kind of falls into, the next part, the corrective and preventive action, right? CAPA. And it's interesting that CAPA has become not just a life science term, but I've run across it in other industries as well. It's just, what corrective action did we put in place? I agree with Regina that CAPAs should probably be held for systemic issues. I do see companies that create a CAPA for basically every deviation and nonconformance. I think that gets to be a little bit burdensome. I'm a fan of, if we've got a systemic issue, we need to identify it, we need to put the corrective action in, and then we need to put the preventive action in to try to prevent that problem, and then of course an effectiveness check. And
I'm going to stop you right there for real quick.
Yep,
Using risk management as your bar.
Awesome. So let's talk risk management. So risk, has become a super hot term, I'd say, in the last 10 years with the FDA. And the best companies that I see use risk, and we've got a slide on risk, so I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of it. But in every part of a decision process related to, what you're making in terms of product, as much as you can embed a risk assessment in there, and again, we'll talk about what that means. That is very, very important because it helps you mitigate the degree of activity that you take in the case of a quality issue. If it's, not a big deal, it's a one-off, you handle that differently than if this is either a systemic risk issue or, patient safety, product quality, or data integrity issue, which is where risk comes into play with the FDA. So thank you for that. Absolutely agree, Regina. That's super important. Looking further here, your device labeling and making sure that your identifiers are correct, your packaging, the way you handle the product, the way the product is stored. I audit a lot of warehouses around the world, and of course, 15 to 25 degrees C, 2 to 8 degrees C is pretty common, and your storage capabilities, the distribution network that you use, or maybe you here in the States, you use the wholesalers, all of the controls that go into place to make sure the product's properly labeled, properly packaged, properly handled, properly stored, and properly distributed, right? Those are super important things. Installation, again, that gets back kind of to the software world, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then look at that last one, control of records on the ISO standpoint. That's where a good, robust document system comes into place. It's really not an option. If you're going to do life science business, you have to have a robust, trackable, and traceable document control and record system in place. And these regulations, again, are very, very clear. There should be no fear of what they say. And as always, if you need some help with that, there's good people out there who can help you kind of get there. So, Regina?
Yeah, I wanted to add another thing here, and that is a lot of these regulations, if you read them a little bit more closely, they're really just good business sense. Like, for instance, you want to probably minimize the number of nonconformities in your product, because guess what? You can't sell nonconforming products. You have to somehow either segregate it and destroy it or rework it, which costs extra money. If you have a good CAPA program, you're preventing problems in your product that will cost your company money. If you are improperly handling or storing the product, well, guess what? You're going to have a lot of unhappy customers that get a product that has been damaged during shipment, and then you're ending up having to, process returns and send out replacements for products. I mean, all these things are just good business sense, that if you use a quality management system, you are actually averting the costs that could be, that could cost your company money. And now we're going to be talking about, device master records and quality system records and complaint files. And these are documentation requirements. But, like Tim said, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So if you don't have a record describing what your medical device is and how it was designed and how you're going to build it each time, then you are selling your customers something that they don't really know what it is. And they may end up using it improperly, because if the labeling's wrong, or if the manufacturing instructions, if you end up getting a product with different quality every single time, you're going to confuse your customers and they'll stop buying your product. A quality system record is very important, just because you need to have a record that you actually did make it properly. The device master record is, how are you going to make the product? And the quality system record is, do you have a system under which this quality system operates? And then on the back end, your complaint files are giving you valuable input for the improvement of your product, and to understand how your product is being used or misused, or somehow can endanger patients. And that's where the medical device reporting comes into. Servicing, those service records actually fall into the complaint system. And I've seen several companies that they say, well, it was just somebody calling to service my instrument. And it's like, well, no, you're not just calling to service the instrument. They're calling because something broke on the instrument, and that is a complaint. And that helps you to also identify, where are your weak points? What parts frequently break down? How do we avert that problem? Do we have to go back to our supplier and have them make parts that are more robust? Or does it mean that you need to change the service intervals to more frequent, because you know that there's normal wear and tear associated with that part? And then that's where the statistical techniques come in. How do you answer that question? Well, you have to do some measurement and analysis. You have to monitor and measure your processes. You need to monitor and measure your product and analyze it. And that kind of goes back to management review as well. But you want to use some kind of a statistical technique to determine that. And generally, you want to use something that's based on some kind of standard that has already been agreed upon. Tim?
Yeah, nope, I agree. And the bottom line here for QMS is, you understand your process, you have control over your processes, and you have good documentation that shows those steps that you've taken to mitigate any quality issues that have popped up. So fully agreed, Regina. The goal here is, ideally, to get really good product that is not only sellable, but that your customers can be very confident in out to the market. And the way you do that, what the FDA set up, is with this independent system that we call a QMS, right? That really leads the way. It puts the structure in place, and really assures that what you're delivering out to the marketplace is robust, and that your customers can be confident in it, and that you don't create a situation internally as you manufacture or you begin to process these things that creates a situation out on the market. I've had a chance to do a webinar on the recall management process, and it's ugly, right? It's if you get to that stage where you haven't really focused enough on your QMS to assure that the product going out your door is robust, that can become a very painful experience. So we're here to
Recalls
help
are,
you today.
yeah, recalls are hugely expensive,
Oof.
and can possibly put a company out of business,
Yes.
because
Great.
not only is it costly to conduct the recall, but then you've lost, your customers have lost confidence in you, and they'll go buy someplace else.
Absolutely.
So, we did get a question about how long it takes to implement a QMS, and I was going to answer this offhand, but then I said, you know what, we may have some people who are new to this whole concept. So I thought I'd create a new slide for it. So there's a bunch of factors that are involved in this. First of all, how much prior knowledge do you have of the QMS? Like, did what we just told you when we outlined the structure of a QMS, was that like old knowledge, presumed knowledge that you've already had because you've worked in a QMS before? Or is this a whole brand new concept to you and all your employees? And of course, it's going to take longer to implement if this is a brand new concept to you, because you're still learning how to be a QMS. And then, it also has to do with how complex is your product? Is there, are there lots of parts in it? Are there lots of contingencies associated with it? Because the job of a QMS is to support your product quality. And if your product has very, very narrow design specifications, then you're going to have to ensure that your QMS can support those very narrow requirements. And how risky is the product? And risk actually, for risk of a product, actually takes place in two different ways. And that is, first of all, what is the likelihood that your product is going to fail? But then the other question is, how delicate of a situation are your patients that are using it? Is this a product that's life-supporting and life-sustaining? Are these for people who, like, for instance, if it's an artificial heart valve, you're talking about people who are pretty sick. How well can they sustain that kind of a product? What's their survival going to be, even if they didn't have the product? I mean, we're talking about, a very fragile patient population. And then how complex is your organization? Is it only the two people that we said, where you have a doer and a checker? Or do you have thousands of people who now have to change their whole job titles, and you have to do a whole reorganization of your organizational structure to support the QMS? These are the questions. Any other concerns?
Yeah, I can tell you, and I've tried to apply this in the time that I've actually been in industry. A good QMS cannot just be a checklist experience. In other words, you check the box and you can say, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this procedure, right? It really is a change of heart. And those companies that take quality and the quality initiative and understand how important the quality function is to producing good compliant product, those are the companies that are going to do well. Quality sometimes within certain companies is seen as just oversight or an expense, and that cannot be the case. A QMS program has to be embedded, and a quality mindset embedded in every single individual within a company, and that takes time and effort, and like we keep talking about, senior management commitment to that. So I can't stress that enough, that a QMS mindset as part of the culture within a life science group is the ideal situation, where you're not constantly fighting, trying to get funding, trying to get the people you need, and trying to get the processes improved. So for those of you that are in those kind of companies where you struggle a little bit with that QMS mindset, stay the course. Your job's important, and you don't want to give up the battle until there's success there, and a union of culture, QMS culture. So, yep, Regina.
Yeah, and I say 3 to 12 months to develop a QMS, but it could take longer if you don't have that mindset, because you're going to be struggling. So I think that it's important to educate your management on how much it's costing the company by not having a QMS,
That's a good point.
by not following these systems. There are so many opportunities here for improvement, but you have to invest the time and money and energy and also selling it on what these benefits are before you can actually really transition to a QMS. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about how you're going to gain value through the QMS, because this is how you can sell it. And that is, we have some value adding aspects of the QMS. We already talked about like cost avoidance. But you can also, your management doesn't want to get in the weeds, and we get that. But they should be able to delegate those tasks to subject matter experts, like your quality organization, like statisticians who can actually ensure that you're following proper statistical techniques, like people who are really in that process of making the product and who understand all of the prerequisites to getting a really high quality product. Those tasks can be delegated to the subject matter experts and reported back up to management. So management doesn't need to get in the weeds. Management is more about making the money, or for instance, if you see that you're having a high rate of quality rejects, of asking the subject matter experts, what's going on here? How do we fix this? How long is it going to take before we have product that's on track? So the management is freed up to do company business. They will need to be involved if there's a recall. So of course, management's going to be like, no, we are going to have a recall-free process. We are going to have product that goes out right first time. And they may also get involved in quality matters that involve high cost or high risk. Mm-hmm. But just because you have a quality management system and management is at the hub doesn't mean that they have to get involved in the weeds. The other evaluating aspect of a QMS is you have standard work. Standard work means that every process is done the same way, the same time, every time. So you have SOPs, you have training, you make sure there's consistency every single time. That means the product that's going out the door is the same as it was the last time, the time before that, and the time next. And if you have the right infrastructure set up that can happen, then it simplifies everything. There's no more, maybe it's not an art anymore, it's a science. And you can take people who are maybe not as not having as much training, and they can be up and running and being able to run that process at low cost very quickly. And that's a value add.
Yeah, and if I could add, Regina, so
yeah.
Especially for those of you that are fairly new to this QMS world, this can look like a daunting task, but I'll use the expression less is more, right? So as I do my audit work, a lot of times I'll see, especially with bigger companies, like these 25-page procedures, SOPs. That's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to understand. So even when if you're going to set your QMS, just the basic procedures, keep them short, keep them simple, make them very clear. And that's what you build a really, you'd much rather have a QMS that can be followed than this way overwritten QMS that's a huge burden to the company. And to be frank, nobody really follows that. If you've got, a gap like that, that's where an FDA inspector is going to say, yeah, you've got documentation in place, but nobody's following it. So, this is where it really gets the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of, yes, you absolutely can do all of this on paper. You can do all of this on a spreadsheet, right? You can. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, there becomes this jump point, and obviously we're talking about QMS as a system, but when you throw the software piece behind it, that becomes a really powerful tool. And you know, that's where that transition point, how well are you managing it? And if it's becoming a struggle on spreadsheets and Word documents, then it might be time to start thinking, maybe we need to, you know, think about an electronic system. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
and keeping it simple.
Yep.
I'm just notified that we are starting to run out of time, so we need to go through
Sure.
these slides a little faster. But the CAPA system will also need to facilitate continuous improvement. And as you have a CAPA system, you should be getting better and better and better at things. And it should get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to do it. And then, of course, we want to use risk management. Risk management saves you the trouble of addressing every single issue equally. Everything, not all issues are equally important. You apply risk management to apply the right amount of effort in a situation. And you should be only focusing on the critical aspects for critical things. And so that leads to the next question of what is critical? Okay, so critical things can be high cost things or they can be high risk things. So recalls, high risk and high cost, because you're talking about releasing product that's non-conforming to the public. You want to ensure that your customer expectations are consistently met. Not all customer expectations are the same. If a customer wants it to be in a brown box and not in a blue box, that might be a cosmetic problem, and you know, sorry, but if it's a customer expectation for performance of your product, big deal. Anything that affects a critical quality attribute, which you should probably have defined as what's critical to quality. You have to meet your regulatory requirements. You have to assure patient safety. You may need to do some experiments and ensuring that you can control the environment in which your product is made to ensure that your critical needs are met. We had some other questions about non-marketed products, products that are developmental, products that are, you know, how much QMS do I need to have for something I'm not selling yet? Mm. And again, it's based on risk management.
Yes, I would agree with you.
So, you know, we talk about, first you got to assess the risks. What is that risk management? Where is there a risk that if you're not applying a QMS in this area, are you going to end up with a poorly designed product? That's a problem. So you'll have to define the meaningful metrics for that product and meaningful metrics that track your progress. And you probably will start off like, you know, with things that are purely R&D lots. They're going to probably be just made in a lab someplace. But as you get gradually and gradually closer to that eventual product launch and you're finally making clinical lots, you'd probably be better operating under the QMS, because those clinical lots are actually going to be used on actual patients. Unless you're IVD, but still. And then you want to document to what extent you're following the QMS at each phase of development and learn from those mistakes. You might not get it right the first time, but that's where we have a CAPA system or your equivalent to a CAPA system in your clinical or preclinical environment that you can use to adjust and get your policies and procedures right for the next product launch effort. You do want, when you define these things, you want to have a justification. You don't want to be accused later on down the line that you did not take the appropriate precautions in developing your product. And in at least class 2 and class 3 devices, you have a design and development plan. And those are the places where you might define those things. And you should work with your regulatory affairs group to make sure they buy in with it.
Yeah, Regina, real quick, I'll add a comment there. So, it used to be back in the day, the research and development part of companies was kind of out of FDA view. And I think they are and have been moving further and further upstream. And so, my advice on this, if again, if you're a startup or you're starting to work through R&D stuff, maybe clinical stage one, you might not need to have a full, QMS in place at that time, but it should be part of the thinking as you continue to develop that product and move it forward. um, it used to just be the commercial operations really that the FDA was looking at, but I've seen more and more activity from the FDA further upstream in terms of the R&D activities and the clinical activities. So my best advice is go ahead and develop at least a scalable system at that point, so that there's really no concern about the agency taking a look at that part of your operation. And that way, as you do scale into commercial operations, you're really all set. And again, it's part of that quality mindset that I think is very, very important to the culture. So,
And so, now we're kind of transitioning into how you do risk management, because risk management is what this is all about. And so you first want to use a collaborative team approach, because no one person can see all the risks in a process. You need a variety of perspectives to see it from different angles. And you want to, of course, have high risks get the most attention. But, we want to think about low patient risk, but excessively costly might not necessarily hit that bar because it's low risk. Or if you have something, wasteful and redundant. Now, those are business risks, and those might be very important to address. But if you're talking about trying to get something fixed right away, maybe you end up having to do some other types of things. Like we talked about high return rate, goods rate for cosmetic defects. You got a lot of people saying, I wanted this in a blue box, but it's in a brown box. Can't please all the people all the time, but maybe they're reaching for the blue box and realizing that because in their hospital coding system, the blue box means one thing and the brown box means something else. Maybe you do have to repackage your product, but you have to, those are individual risks that are assessed individually. And then we kind of talk, this is kind of also where risk management intersects with software, because software has a huge opportunity to minimize risk. And so Kim is our software person on this webinar. So I will let him
sure.
discuss all the myriad things having to do with software.
Yeah, and this is where software comes really into play, because it at a certain point, and I keep talking about this jump point, there are too many variables and too much data for human eyes and the human brain to really take in and evaluate. So as you build and think about an electronic QMS system and what its capabilities are, risk should be a central part of the hub. And risk, it's not complicated. It's just a matrix. It's a scoring matrix. What's the severity of the, and basically what's the severity of the risk, and what's the level of, how often will that risk occur? Is it detectable, and is it probable? And it really looks just like a matrix, and you do a scoring effort on that matrix, and that helps you determine this is low risk, this is medium risk, this is high risk. It can be used for suppliers, it can be used for your raw materials, it can be used for your processes, it can be used for your production work. It's just a way to say this is not, I'm not gonna say important, this is more critical than this, so we need to focus our efforts here. And that's what software really from a QMS standpoint can do, is it can pick up on all that data and help you make some kind of sense of it, making it very visible to you that, okay, this is where we're having the biggest problem based on a risk factor. These issues, it looks like we've got them under control, so we don't need to focus as much attention there. And that's what software can do for you. From a QMS perspective, it can really help you maintain focus on what's important, where the critical issues are. And again, the ICH, the Q9 document, quality risk management, well-written document, and it really has you focus on three things: patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. So that's what this whole risk thing is about, and it should be just embedded into your QMS world. And again, software can help you make a lot of sense and help you mitigate, manage risk. So, Regina?
Yeah, we had a lot of questions in software coming into this thing, and we're talking about,
Sure.
Cybersecurity. Yes, obviously you need to understand the risk with cybersecurity when you're implementing a software system. So, ISO 27001 may be important. We also need to consider Part 11. That is a requirement by the FTA, as is data integrity, which is related to 21 CFR Part 11. Yeah, so when you are creating the software system that minimizes human error and reduces your operational costs and can shorten your cycle time and take a lot of the document reviews out, but because you're using the system that governs your rules-based software, and so you know that if it got through the software without an error, that it's probably pretty good. You still need to apply risk management to your development of your software.
Mm-hmm.
So we move on to the next one here, and we kind of talked about the two different aspects for software, which is risk is based on how severe is it and how likely is it to happen. But we also want to think about device safety in terms of safety and effectiveness, and that's kind of like the that similar thing. It's risk-benefit ratio. So you think about how can the device could be misused. What kind of fail-safes do we have? What kind of patient population? We kind of talked about that, treating which condition, the users, and then the effectiveness. Does it work? How is it supposed to work? How do you have proof that it's working the way you said it was? Again, document everything. What do you need to do? How do you confirm that it's working? And quality of risk management for at least medical device has to do with this. But ICH-Q9, which is Tim's expertise, follows a quality risk management model as well. And I'm going to let him discuss this, and then I'll show you what we do for devices.
Sounds good. So I'll do this quickly because I know we're watching time here.
Yeah.
So basically, there's these components, and this diagram comes right out of ICH-Q9. The risk assessment, right? That's where you determine the severity of the risk and how often it might occur, the occurrence of risk. And with that, you identify, you analyze, and you evaluate, right? So that's the identification piece. And then ideally what you're trying to do is where you figure out your critical or major risk is put some kind of controls in place. So I just audited a company this week where they do a pre-process risk assessment, and then they do a post-risk control risk assessment. And there should be a mitigation activity that lowers that risk, right? And so you see this in the food industry, you see this in the airline industry. Understand your risk, put your controls in place, and then review those controls and make sure that they're effective. That really is the sum of how you do this. There's different ways to do it, but again, I can't stress enough, if you've got a lot of data points that you're trying to manage, an Excel spreadsheet can get you so far, but this is where quality management software comes into play, because it can really begin to put those pieces together for you and help with this process. So yeah, this is an expectation at this point. There are 483 and warning letters revolve around risk or the lack of risk management, and this is an important factor that you've got to incorporate into your QMS. Regina?
Yeah, and it's especially important for device people, because look at this. We got a 13-step process for device quality risk management. per ISO 14971, which the FDA is adopting. So they are giving warning letters for not using appropriate risk management. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds here. We saw what ICH 29 has, and a lot of this has to do with, risk identification, which is identify no foreseeable hazards. Estimate risk for each hazard. Is risk reduction necessary? I want to focus on that. Is risk reduction necessary question? Because if you are accepting the risk as is, you are saying that it is either low occurrence or low harm, then you can actually go to making sure that you're complete and accepting the risk as is. That means you do not have to address every single risk. But a CAPA may be necessary if it is high risk, and risk reduction is necessary. So if you get like a complaint saying that this product didn't work properly, is a very different complaint than I didn't like the color of the box, for instance. So this is where we follow the process. Now it looks really confusing, and I always say, if you think that this looks too hard, maybe it's just easier to just think about it in terms of plan, do, study, act. That it's just a continual learning process. That you're looking at what your foreseeable hazards are. You're carrying out a risk management plan based on the known risks of that product, and you're going to implement some kind of mitigation plan. You're going to see if it works. That's the study part, and then you're going to act, and you're going to have to update that mitigation plan. And an Excel spreadsheet using this FMEA tool can help. Or you say, okay, the function is, what the function is, the potential failure mode. What could go wrong? How severe is it? That's what the S is. O, that's how likely is it to occur. D is how you detect it. You do some kind of a mathematical formula. You figure out its criticality and say, okay, above this certain number, we need to take action. And what's your action plan? This follows it for every single potential problem, risk. You can document this. You can keep it as a risk management plan. You keep it in your hip pocket. You get a new risk, you add it to the spreadsheet.
Absolutely. Good point.
So how would you know if your risk management is effective? Well, you're not going to be getting anything that you don't already have documented here and that you haven't already mitigated. That's how you know your risk management plan is effective. And risk management is closely, especially with effectiveness of the quality management system, is closely associated with making sure that you are efficient as well as eliminating risk. So you want to trim down your wastes by making sure that you are limiting the amount of unnecessary transport, movement, excessive inventory, that you are eliminating those defects, that you're not making more product than will be used and will just expire before it gets sold, that you're not sitting around waiting, that you're not hiring people to do nothing. This is closely involved with the quality management system, especially with resourcing. And so you want to also think about the quality management system is there to find ways to be more efficient. You want to eliminate those wasteful activities. You have CAPAs. Yes, they reduce nonconformities, but reducing nonconformities is also reducing cost. That's how you make your quality management system effective and working for you. And so we just wanted to take a quick little detour here now that we've finished showing our our cards and talk about Compliance Quest was partnered with us. And you can see that they have a fantastic computerized system that has huge amount of functions.
Yes. Thank you, Regina. This is Valerie Hoffman, Marketing for Compliance Team. And I just want to thank so much Compliance Quest and Tim for being here, as well as you guys. We're going to take questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions in just a minute. I know we're running a little bit over, but first, just want to, again, thank Compliance Quest, and to let you guys know a little bit more about them. They are a next generation AI-powered quality and safety management platform that is built on Salesforce. Their connected suite of pre-validated solutions helps businesses of all sizes increase quality, safety, and efficiency as they bring their products from concept to customer success. Their data-driven platform is easy to implement, use, maintain, and it comes with best-in-class integrated processes augmented by AI to help mitigate risk, streamline communication, collaboration, and increase innovation, compliance, profit, and customer loyalty. So you can see they've got quite a suite there. You'll be receiving a survey after this webinar ends, and those who do the live participation, Compliance Quest is going to be offering you a gift card as a thank you. So make sure to stay until the end, and you can get that survey done, and they'll be sending you out a thank you as a gift card as a thank you. So moving on, just a quick blurb about us. If you've been on our website or webinars before, you can know a little bit about the compliance team, but since 2003, we've protected over 200 life science companies by assuring their quality systems, engineering, validation programs, and clinical studies consistently meet compliance standards. Our knowledge of FDA, ISO, EMA, Health Canada, and other regulating bodies secures you and your customers from costly regulatory and compliance mistakes. We do partner with Compliance Quest on implementing QMS systems and things like that. So if that's something you're interested in and you would like to talk to Compliance Quest or have more questions for Tim or for us, there's all of our contact information, so you can write that down. I encourage you, if you're looking for more compliance resources, you can check out Compliance Team's Compliance Resource Library at complianceteamllc.com. So if you haven't checked out our Compliance Resource Library, please do. And with that, I know we're running a little bit over, but let's take maybe 1 or 2 questions, if you guys don't mind. For the non-conforming products, is it required to identify corrective and preventative actions, or can you only be identified or just corrections? I'm not sure if I'm reading that totally right, but it's basically a CAPA question.
So
I don't know if you can see it in the questions.
It's all governed by risk. So, you know, non-conforming product could be as serious as a CAPA with a recall, that you found that you released something that should not have been released. That could be a CAPA and recall. But it could also be that it, like I said, if it's something like, I didn't like the color of the box, that might be non-conforming if it's just a customer perception. So you need to understand your risks and take the appropriate action, and that should be defined in your risk management plan, which would normally be, doesn't have to be, in the form of an FMEA or other risk management document. So there's no hard and fast rule, but if it's a regulatory violation, it's obviously much more serious than if it's a, you know, something cosmetic and anything in between. Tim?
Yeah, I can add very quickly to that. So at the heart of it, when you find a nonconformance, you really do need to perform an investigation and understand the root cause and put some kind of corrective action in place. In my opinion, you're better off You don't necessarily have to generate a CAPA at that point. I've always kind of held CAPAs to more serious systemic issues or, you know, a critical issue. But I think what's important is you want to get your hands around that issue as quickly as possible. And to do that, you should put some kind of, you should do the investigation, get your root cause, and put some kind of corrective action in place. Now, if it happens again, right, then it's an escalation. And that's exactly what Regina's saying. That's where risk comes into play. Like we may have a pattern here, right? A one-off versus a systemic pattern. Those are two different things that require different levels of activity. But I do think in almost every case, if you have some type of nonconformance, you should have at least done a root cause analysis and obviously done the correction on what that problem is. And if it continues, then you go ahead and raise it up to a CAPA. So.
Yeah, I agree on the root cause analysis question. That you're absolutely correct. You need to understand what the cause is. Like for instance, if it's the wrong color box and it's because you packaged the product in the incorrect container with the wrong labeling matter, that's a recall because you're now violating the product labeling. But you need to understand that cause. Another question?
I think that kind of wraps it up. I believe you guys answered at what phase of drug development should the QMS be in place? I think that was already answered, correct?
Yes, you did answer that.
Awesome. Then I think that's it. I appreciate everybody hanging in and coming to attend this session today. I hope this session has been very valuable and you can take some of this information and immediately implement it. I want to say a special thanks to Compliance Quest joining us today, and for Tim with all of his great knowledge. It has been wonderful having you guys as part of this Ask the Expert session. Please look for our upcoming sessions. They'll be monthly, and you can follow us on LinkedIn or check out complianceteamllc.com to make sure you get on our mailing list so you don't miss signups for when these events happen. And with that, I wish everyone a great afternoon. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Take care, everybody.